Nyandaya Sanje Chudan Soji Chanan La Chanju Bado Danenge Dagu Chijin Jive Sonan Jive Drola Banje Sanje Chu Sanje Chudan Soji Chanan La Chanju Bado Danenge Dagu Chijin Jive Sonan Jive Drola Banje Sanje Drola Sanje Chedan Soje Chanan La Chanju Bado Dani Jesu Dagui Jeje Jeve Sanan Je Sanje Druva Sho La Dan La Mime Dam Nan Ji Yong Bo Dan Jejin La So Shawa La Chawa Chawa Sanje Shumbare De Shin De Jeta Jeje De Me Chin Din De Tega Jeje De Je Sa Ye De Joka Tin Che Ba La Shu De Jin Ku De la Benyan Jason doesn't say me down, but I never got to la to be Sonia and Amala Yakatan with Anija to put that American. Draw Gunji Jana Jizan, but Tam Dear Gado, Dark Witch, oh, that's it. Any Bangun love power liturgy. Midadunga Donga says, Midadunga, I may say Chawashim Bonam Jonche. Cho to Simni Jonge be Chene Rashim Meba in Chene. Oh, that's one I say Chene. Ane Kondo Midaba Charada. Ane Dame Rabala Sova. Ane Dambateta Carres and oh, Lumaki. Chawasumbo Chawacheva. Smithadum, Doma Dame say Chawasumbo Namchunche. Cho to Simni Jonge Ba, say Gala. Ane Simji Ranshin, Ane Tramadan Chewa Teniki, or Ane Traman Jonga Chengan de Carre Sana, Ane or Cherashi Mabare. Oh, yeah.
So, Arya Nagarjuna has said that all of the various teachings on impermanence, on the teachings of selflessness, the subtle and the coarse and subtle forms of selflessness, these meditations are all ultimately designed to enable one to affect the meditation on the absence of intrinsic existence, which is the principal agent that purifies the mind. It destroys all of the defilements within the mind.
Oh, yeah. Tedan Tumba, Ani Namde Gasoyan, Tony Deva Trojuchi, Gomba Hama Tedin Yin. Chenison, I say, I know Koala Trod Shebaki, Trojiki, Lamu, the Carres, and I know Tony Tovitawa. That he, Kola, I know Mitabadan, Dungawala, so Gomba Teta, I know Tony Dobaki, Lord Jebaki Tam, Gomba Hama Tedin.
Likewise, the same thing is said in the Compendium of Valid Cognition by Master Dharmakirti, that all of the other meditations are supports, or they function as methods for developing understanding of emptiness. And it's this understanding of emptiness which is the primary agent that affects one's liberation.
Oh, Ane Jumden Deji, Toma, Ane Gasore, Midabadam, Ane Midabaraba Chiwa Midabadam, Ane Chivi Jesu, Ane Gileki Jesu Dane, I saw good Dunga Yonzula, so Ane Dembala Dene, Jawa Chimon do Hamitini, Undu Hami combat Teniki, Ane Teniki.
Therefore, that's why the Buddha has taught in the beginning that first one meditates on the form of impermanence, which the aspect of impermanence which is death. That we are impermanent and will die, and then after we die, we are liable to fall into the lower realms of existence, hell and so forth, and to experience suffering there. So these meditations on death and impermanence are designed to get us to seek to follow the path of the person of lesser scope, so as to ensure that we achieve a high status form of rebirth in our next life.
오야 다디제라 아노 가상칸이 쇼와 나신 전에 아노 코아다다 동아지 라신도 토네 아노 코아랑 와지 내종게 셈 와종데 아니 타바되니 그 로신이 제거
Then that's why that serves as a foundation. That kind of those meditations serve as a basis for then developing understanding that samsara in its entirety is of the nature of suffering. This is what we discussed yesterday and previously, how it is that samsara in its entirety is of the nature of suffering. And so we have to have the basis for developing that understanding, and that's the topic in the second portion of the path.
Oh yeah, then 되게 아니 주민발 챤네 아니 뒤에서 아니 다 동아 탐색이 싸워 난세 말을 봐 종식이 아니 사모 동반이 아니 땡겨와 연장 순자네 셰위 가서 담비 주민발 챤 아니 이외 코알라 태서 좋아 챤 이외 아니 사위 라그리 다 강사 지그 왕도 챤나 이외 사위 라그리당 아니 순배 자체에 남지를 받대 강사 지그 왕도 챤나 담보네 특징을 중간적이나 다 두신 바래.
So that's why then in the second phase of the path, one develops renunciation, which means a kind of revulsion towards the entirety of samsara, recognizing its suffering nature. Then with that as a basis, then one enters into understanding the nature of reality, developing understanding of emptiness, which acts as the direct agent that produces liberation. Then that's sort of presenting the basic elements of the path. La Gendi Gansa Chiki.
강사 직 담보네 아니 남라 티바치베라나 토마 중간에 강사 직의 왕도 잖아 아니 담보 그 주면 받채 이와 그 코알라 초야채 순배 특징라 강사 이외 사회 라브리 순배 자치베 라브리 담받채
알레
라코선
규멤버체스나 디 규멤버체 당보 규멤버체스
담보 주민바 체스다 전임바 담보 주민바 체스는 순자네 셰베 그 소나시 제를 담보 주가래서나 된다 미다 동아 담에서 차와서 뭐 남종제 세가라 미다바다 동아와다 동아다 소와디 칸사디 주민바 체
So therefore, it's presented. There are different presentations of the sequence of the stages of the path. If one is doing it in terms of a person who is following the Mahayana, then one way of proceeding is by first of all, the person understands the development of death, impermanence, and so forth, and then the general suffering nature of samsara, so as to develop renunciation. This serves to literally ripen or mature one's mental continuum, to prepare it, in effect. And then one sequence of proceeding then is for some Mahayana practitioners, then they would directly engage in study and developing understanding of the nature of reality, that is emptiness, and then based on that understanding of emptiness, engage in the specifically Mahayana practices that are the things practiced by the Bodhisattva. That's one system of procedure for if one's entering into the Mahayana path in that way.
Oh yeah, 아니다. 담보 주민배 가사 대라. 아니 가서래 림바니와 사회라림. 땅에 대라. 아니 초도 손이 셈니 종제비. 아니 최내라 심매바 인세 되기. 아니 좀 된 대기 롱도지 땜배 채셔를 장 아니 좋아기 아니 내 좀 봐라 내 좀 받지 봐야 말해 저희 동안매지 부 땜반예당 소나시 전에 지금 가서 진주가 뭐랑 가서 저기 동안 매지부 저기 동아지 내세와 그 매지부데 안에 장제지 때문에 아니 개발농도 지tem바래 개발농도 지tembe 차셔를 장 안에 들어가기 아 가서 내기 동아세와 아니 제래 차셔를 해야지.
So therefore, then, this teaching on the nature of reality, that is, that phenomena are devoid of intrinsic existence, is the principal aspect of the path that is functions to eliminate, to destroy all of the defilements in the mind and to purify the mind of the defilements. And thus, that is why it is said that the entirety of the Buddha's teaching, now the teaching of the Buddhas is comprised of the scriptural teaching, as well as the realization teaching, or the teaching of the attainments. And the entirety of this, as it's taught in the introduction to the Bodhisattva's way of life, is medicine. It's medicine designed to alleviate all of the various forms of suffering of the sentient beings. Now, each portion of the teaching, it's said that the teaching of the Buddhas, both the scriptural and the realizational aspects of the Buddha's teaching, is medicine, and it functions in its entirety as this single medicine that eliminates the suffering of all sentient beings. Now, it's divided into multiple portions, and each of the parts of it is designed to eliminate specific forms of suffering, specific different kinds of problems and so forth that sentient beings experience. But all of it in total is designed so as to lead to, or to be directly, the teaching on the essencelessness of things, or the lack of intrinsic existence of things. It all flows into that.
Oh yeah, ane sanje ki temba ki lundo ki tembe chasere yang ane doyi dunga kasore sewa tende ina yang da dunga 탐제지 싸움 아니 오다 세와 청경기 아니 다 가르래서나 남들 가르래서나 초도 셈니 종제 위춘여를 하신 매바인 스와티 전다제지 가라 아니 양고라마 종가 준비 텐진 내규세 맨지부 사모단지 타단 차위람 파조 루주에서 공부나 지신 콘도 주바 친지로 전에오 대소한 말이 로 텐진 내규세 맨지부 서리가라 탄진세데 안에다 따왕아이나 탄진다 제 맞아와 라신이 추비 여다 라신이 추와진비 쯤바텔라 자네 된다위 라신이 추바진비 말이밤 아니 짐바데 세월 체비 아니 매지보데 가래 사람 탄진 내그세 매지보 사모단데 타당 차외람 사모 아니 돈이 도베 셔라 다제지 탄이단 차외람데레스
Therefore, so here then, the Buddha's teaching, of course, has so many different portions to it, or parts, and the various parts function to eliminate various aspects of suffering, different types of suffering. However, they all lead into, ultimately, into the single thing which is the final or supreme agent that purifies the mind of defilement, and that is this wisdom that understands reality in the sense of things being devoid of intrinsic nature. This is stated equally in a verse by Je Tsongkhapa, where he says that the
탄진 내규세 탄진 아시 추와진비 쯤바지세 텐드라베 라신이 추와진바게 내규세월 체비게 맨데 가르레서 맨 직보데 가르레서나 안에 사모된데 타단 차외람 사모 우메다와 다제게 탄이단 차위 안에 우메람
So this medicine that's referred to in the introduction to the Bodhisattva's way of life is stated in just different words in a verse by Je Rinpoche, where he says that the medicine that eliminates the entirety of the misapprehension of extremes or views here, one could say. Here, the two extremes or two views, let's say, is the view that things exist intrinsically, on the one hand, a kind of realist view, or the nihilistic view, which denies that things exist at all or denies the functionality of things. Then this soul medicine is that which eliminates entirely the net of those wrong views, the net which basically we're captivated in. So here then this is, he explains at the end of the verse that this is the middle path, which is the understanding the profound dependent origination and emptiness in the sense of the profound dependent origination. That view, that understanding and wisdom, which realizes dependent origination as emptiness as dependent origination, is the soul medicine then that destroys or eliminates that net of wrong views that were contained.
Oh yeah. Samotenje tadan chawi lam o tani dajeje tadan dewi ana umi tawa ani pajo ludu yese gombanam chisin kondu chuba chinji lo songa na shin jerida dajeje tadan dewi umi lam ani loben ludu da pabala da dawa chabala sowa ani paba o pajo ludu yeseji 아니 치신 짜와 진도 아니 콘도 주바시 진지 럽도 소 진의 송과래 아주 루슈래 고마나 치신 콘도 주바 진지 럽
Then the end of the verse is, it's a prayer here saying, please bless me, or one could say, please empower me to understand this profound middle way, just as it has been taught by the Master Nagarjuna and his disciples. Here, his spiritual disciples refers to Master Aryadeva as well as Master Chandrakirti. So please bless me or empower me to be able to understand that profound middle way, just as it has been explained by the Master Nagarjuna and his followers.
Oh yeah, tender 아니 루루 야세지 아니 기타 자와신도 콘도 치바라 아니 또 콘도 치바면 또 봐라 아니 내가 태고와 인자 다 딘루루기 쇼는 연청하기 아니 어다마 셀론도 뒤장치 배치
So therefore, this is the motivation we should have, thinking when we're listening to this profound instruction of the Master Nagarjuna, his precious Garland, which teaches this path. We should be wishing to understand this and ultimately realize it just as it has been explained by the Master Nagarjuna. And that's why what we're doing here is a brief exposition and a brief explanation of the what is found here. Master Nagarjuna is teaching in the precious Garland.
Oh yeah, that doesn't do what you know. Oh yeah, that doesn't go at all. 소직감에 타제도 세들에 이리와 싸와 데리베 소직감에 탑제도 세바까지 주잖아 민자 와니 미미치 대나니가 렌데미 니 땅마리 친사로와 가데 따도 주나니 대마지 못하래
지친수
가데 따도 주나
지친
친사로 오야 대따다래 따따다래샤 다디니 여기 가서래 내가 그 좋아요다 매 자반이 전이 아니 내가 그 좋아요나 아니 교회에 담바들에 텐데위 교회한테 내와딘 집에 오나마 라시지까지만 여도 세나 다오 라시지까지만 여도 세나 다 되라 초지감니 탐제도 세바까지 추천나 민자 아니 미미치 대나니가 린데 미세다 루스도가 초지감니 탐제도 세가나 아니 자지 가소래 누전 대다大了 내가 깨지마 내가 깨집니다 봐开两把大让开两把大都见大了都见大把一了那个了俺开启没大把开两把拿心初级感呢初级感的切记三把的就啊短到短的然后他们讲呢他们讲都俺那三百个就嘛就的清楚人的就这样呢你个这把的怎么得清楚一些让我清白了得清楚了让我清楚一下我的打对不对那참 주바 가야지 말이야. 다니와 참 주바니 코자 참 주니 통다 미비 교 다바 닝바 인베 랑신다 내가라 다비냐와 매도 세 봐. 다바 닝바 대다도 예바 사바 주지 매주래와 까지 그 주와들이 많이 봤어. 닝바 랑신 내가 랑신다 내가라 다비냐와 대다 매도 세나. 깨지 이나 리메지 님바 가다 칼라시 땡지 깨지 이나야 님바 가다 칼라시 세오다 데라 간레서레서나 찹주바 오 이나 깨지마 용 고그래 가소레 찹주 오 이나 깨지마 용 고그래 깨지바 이나 안에랑 투비 튀니워 리이나 리미네 하고 그면도 좋아 림 바제 림면로 상도 배죠 림바 튀니와 되바 림바 연구 말에 스케치바 이나 랑 투비 튀니와 아니 되바 림바 연구 말에 스리 메비셀 어디 중오고 여바 테니 시디수 내비 닝바 가양 요 말에 스케치바 이나 가양 딱 칼라시게 되 메와타 야
So this next in the text comes a refutation of the position which is held by the Vaishnavas. Vaishnavas hold that there's a person, a sort of a soul or person, which is permanent. And the Vaishnavas say, we Vaishnavas, followers of Vishnu, say that there's an ancient person which is permanent and which is devoid of any kind of beginning or end. It's beginningless and endless. And therefore, these faults which you Madhyamikas have ascribed by examining the nature and the occasions of things above don't apply to us. We don't have those kinds of faults. So the Vaishnava would say that kind of thing about the spiritual being or person that is beginningless and endless. They would say it's permanent and primordial, one could say as well. They say that their view of that spiritual person doesn't obtain the faults which are ascribed to the positions that the Madhyamika has negated or rejected above. And so this is explained in verse 68, where it says, if a real thing is momentary, then since it would cease to exist entirely at each moment, how could anything be old? Old here, literally it means old, but it also means kind of like primordial here. And if a real thing is non-momentary, then since it would persist without change, how could anything be old? That's the translation there of this verse. So here then the Madhyamika argument is that if Vishnu here, Vishnu is a name for this primordial person that is beginningless and endless and permanent. If Vishnu is a thing here, meaning a positive functioning thing, an existent, then it necessarily has to be momentary. if something is momentary, if it exists in a momentary fashion, then there's no like composite of it in the second moment after it has been produced. Okay, that's what is said here literally. And then because that's the case, if that very functioning thing which existed in previously, how could it be possible for that to exist in a primordial fashion that endures into a subsequent time period? And it's simply not the case that such a thing could endure in that way.
Oh yeah, that kadi, denji keji ina yang, nimba kata kalashi, say kadi denbyong o imbisi, keji ba ina yang, orang keji ba imba kelen bang, keji ba ina yang, ngadu na nevi o chi jang nimba gayang, ani ta kalashi di, o nimba la, o nimba juwa. US, nimba US, keji ma ina yagi kasora ngati ngo chi jang lebi nimba gayang ta kala shi nimba juwa yinjang yagi kasora ngo tini chidi su nimba ta kala shi di ani yoba de me go kure sente songare de ta lo kone.
So then the argument then here is that, and then the alternative would be that if this stable thing, that is, if such a stable thing existed, thing here refers to a functioning thing that functions and operates. If that stable thing is in fact momentary, then the thing that existed previously, how could it be possible for that that primordial thing or old thing to remain in a subsequent time period as well? Because this thing, this old thing would have changed. That is, if something is old, it's necessarily undergone some kind of change, is the argument here, that being an old thing necessarily entails that it has undergone some form of change.
Oh yeah, that is la. Siwa keji ma ranchin ji chuwa kaba la. Ta si yebe na ne. Ta keji ma la cheche yi chawa tenpa asi. Keji ma asi na jidang rang chubdi ji keji niwa mito ba de la keji ma asi kwa re. Rang chubdi ji keji mito de rang chubdi ji keji niwa mito ba de la. O tenre we keji ma de la ani cheche yinbe chawa ten de. Ani keji ma maje la magaba tinis tini wa midebe midaba yinla maje la magaba tini tini wa midebe midaba yinla tini keji giran tini keji chik midab rang chu de keji ma mideba tini keji chik rang sin ji na wa yino se ta yang mo ma yue de na ani tela chida keji ta yo ba 대신 도마 유다고 어디 치다 깨지 마텔라 깨지 마라 깨지 마 집어텔라 랑기 채사도 집이 아니 치다 개령 고레스 고랑 그나라 치미 다시 개령 거와 아니 랑기 채사도 집이 치다 집이 밖에 개령 바 대신도 랑기 채사도 집이 통마지에 여거와 토마다 타마 여바 연배 안에 통단이 그 유야 여바 다진 아니 그저마데 가소를 되라 토마다 타마다 유숨기 아랑게 차샤라 개념고 그래 이런 거에 그저마데 안에 참여 중오 이런 거에 참여 중오 여바 말해
가지 개지기 ngobo yoma res.
참여 중업을 요.
So here then, there's a refutation of a moment as being established by means of its own intrinsic nature. That is, that a moment of time exists by means of its own intrinsic nature. This has multiple divisions, but the first of these is demonstrating that moments possess parts. A moment of time possesses parts. And so here the realist is responding to the Madhyamika's arguments above by saying that realists in general would argue in favor of the intrinsic nature of time, or the intrinsic nature of a moment, and say that when a moment has arisen, when it has arisen and it has not yet ceased, that is a moment. And then it doesn't endure into a second time period after its duration, and that is what we mean by impermanence. We accept that form of impermanence. However, a single moment itself exists or endures, remains by means of its own intrinsic nature. So the realist here is positing that notion of time, that time period has its own intrinsic nature during its, for the extent of its duration. And then the argument here is on verse 69, where it says, just to hear the reply to that is that just as one conceives of a moment as having an end, so too one should conceive of it as having a beginning and a middle. That's the first half of the verse. And then the commentary here says that just as that single moment necessarily has an end, you've already accepted that your moment that exists by means of its own intrinsic nature ends. Therefore, you necessarily have to accept that it possesses a part in the sense of the end, which you've already posited for the nature of the moment of time. And since it has that end point, an end point in time, then similarly, you have to understand and you have to examine it to think that it has to have a beginning and a middle as well. You necessarily have to accept that because it's impossible for a functional thing to be partless. An existent here for a functional thing necessarily has parts.
Oh yeah, 대다까지 좀 다시 다치르세. 대다까지 좀 다시 지den까지 내와 민 세대기 지den까지 내와 민 세대 누지 지den 내다 지지 뒤비 지den 대다. 까지 지 라신지 내와 민바. 是吧? 지den까지 내와 민 까지 지 라신지 내와 마인바. 마인바 가르에서 랑기 차셔서 규비 계속 숨지 다니 임비체르세요. 라신지 내나 까지 지자 라신지 나와 차셔 숨지 다니 규비 랑기 차셔서 주가 까지 숨지 다니 임비체르세요.
So then the last part of the verse, the second half of verse 69 explains that since a moment has a threefold temporal nature, the world does not remain for even a moment. That's the way it's given here. And so it says that here the world, the world here again refers to both the external environmental world as well as the internal or the world of the inhabitants, the beings that exist within this environment. So that's the subject of this discussion here, this particular argument here, saying that the world is the subject, and it doesn't. It's necessarily the case that it doesn't endure for even a single moment, which is established by means of its own intrinsic nature, because because a moment has as its nature, it consists in itself as of three moments. It has as its very nature three moments, beginning, middle, and end.
야, 다 되니 랑 차샤를 주게 되는 줄 알다 되니 차샤랑 신지 주와 가바텔라 니와 차샤랑 신 주와 가바텔라 다양 가지기 토마다 타당 유순보데 소소랑 신지 내서 세나 통다 팔수마 통다 유순보데 소소랑 신지 주와 내서 세나 토마 유당 타마양 깨지 직도 삼바차 세디 깨지마 티 토마다 퇴간 유당 안에 타마되다 와 라시안 칸라양 칸라장 라시지 아니 내와에 叫 말에 라시안 칸라양 라시지는 내가 대체我们的 연구도와 라시래장 마이노 세고랑 라시안 칸라야 라시지 叫 마이데스各级新都아니 차유매大把钱外大金300钱啦过了恰当间马节原来大把钱啦大金300钱啦通马当遇到他们顺利的恰当节为起的是恰当节把印章让先看来讲让先进来往就往马的是是恰当就往马的是样
So then the next verse explains how it is that is a refutation of the parts of a moment being established by means of their own intrinsic nature. The realist might come back and say, well, the beginning, the middle, and the end, each of these individually endures by means of its own intrinsic nature. The realist could make that kind of argument. To try to, and then the verse 70 explains the refutation of that. As with a moment, one should also consider the tripartite nature of its beginning, middle, and end. There is no beginning, middle, or end that arises either from itself or something else. So here the commentary explains that the moment, if we take any moment, and we say that it has a beginning, it has a middle, and it has an end, and that's the subject of under discussion here. We would say that it doesn't have any kind of that the middle, the beginning, middle, and end of that moment doesn't arise such that it doesn't appear or arise such that it endures by means of its own intrinsic nature, either from itself or from something else. These two possibilities. Just like, and the reason that's given for that is that just like as in the case of the moment as a whole, if we examine the parts of the moment, whether they themselves possess parts or not, and we think about that carefully, then we see that the parts of the moment of themselves, the beginning, the middle, and the end, likewise possess a beginning, a middle, and an end as well. These three parts. So anything at all that, like that moment of time, has those multiple parts.
Oh yeah. 다 존대기 가서를 토다 유스모데 참여인바 까베 니다게 잡종 참여 까네 오버 참여 까네 차차수 주베 차제 인베 랑게 차샤를 떠봐 인상 안에 라신지 주어 고바레
This argument above serves as a negation or refutation of any kind of extended thing that has extension being established by means of its own intrinsic nature. An extended thing meaning like a period of time or a composite thing like a functioning thing like a table or whatever. There's no such thing, extended thing like that is, because all functional things possess parts, therefore, it's impossible for them to be established by means of their own intrinsic nature.
Oh, yeah. That 되게 가서래 차자라신지 주바 까네. 다 뒤에라. 당은 남정기 나라 퇴나시 전에 안에 가사 된주기 직당 투마단 차위 다지 라시메 바투베데 다 지바데 레고아레 직당 투자지 된주고 라신 주바 가바니 타대 초지 지부민 처음에 반에 가야메 세데 아니 다 갈소래 타대 초지 지부민 세 수전용 오버되다 직분이 직도된바 말에 직도된바 말에 초타다다 제위실 차제 초타다다 제위실 직도되나 콜라 아니 초타다다 맞이하고 그랬어 아니 다마주의 제매대에서 초타다다 제와 마인바그 제매대 수전 초매 수전기 최라 초매바 가야메 비칠 수전 탐제 아니 랑그 두전 두알에 때네 차셔 두알에 때네 쇼거와 인장 수전 초매바네 가야메 비치로 세가나 타대 초지 지부메 초매바네 가야메.
So here then, next goes to the refutation of any kind of functioning thing or existent being established by means of its own intrinsic nature, by means of the reasoning that shows that such things are neither unitary nor composite, or neither unitary or plural in nature by means of intrinsic nature. This sort of reasoning is the same one that applies to the refutation of an intrinsically existent I or person in terms of, as we find in the, for example, in the great stages of the path, where it shows how the person doesn't exist as a unitary thing, nor as an intrinsically existing composite thing. So here it's applying then, our same reasoning is applied to things that are in physical things that physical functioning things. So this is given in the beginning of verse 71. No material, or one can say physical thing, is a unitary whole because it has many directional parts. And the rest of the verse goes on to say, and there is no material thing that does not have directional parts. Without the unitary whole, there cannot be the many parts. Without the existent, there cannot be the non-existent. That is, existent here refers again to a functioning thing, non-existent to a thing that exists but is non-functional. So the commentary here says that a physical functioning thing is the subject of the discussion here. And it's not really a single thing in reality. And the reason for that is given that is because it possesses multiple sides, one could say, or if it's a physical extended thing composed of multiple particles of matter, then it possesses sides to it, parts in directional sense. And here, this reason showing that, the reason given which shows that it possesses these directional parts, different directional parts, is established. It's not the case that that is not established, because there's no such thing there's no such thing at all as a physical thing which does not have directional parts to it.
Oh yeah, 양나 두스자 총과를 수전 용어 체제 지도 된바 지도 된바 된럽지 지도 매대 차제 인비철 차제 다마도 지면 차제 인데 아니 차제 참매당 뭔가인 참매 세자라 미스비칠 수전 처음에는 가면 비칠 차제 참매당 뭔가인 참매 세자라 미스비칠 두스나 들고래
라 어디
여고서
님아서
수전 용어 체제 직도 된바 마인범 된루지 직도 매대 대바투 직도 매대 로아들이 내가 초타다다 제위칠 스걸 누가 데이터라 차제인 비칠 차제인 비칠
So another way to say this is that positive way is that a physical thing, the extended material or physical thing, there's no such thing as such a thing which is established as intrinsically or in reality as a unitary thing. It doesn't exist at all because it possesses parts. That is, one can talk about it in terms of directional parts like front, back, and so forth, or one can speak of it in terms of parts in the more basic sense of divisible sections of it or portions of it like that.
아니 다마도 쩨메데 세데라 차제 마인 비쩨메데 아니 차제 인데 아니 여반이래 아니 차제당 참면이 보던 뭔가래 참여 세자라 미스바 인장 다 차제래 전에 수전 처음에 가양 매위치로 세지 두스자티나 그거래 그봐 연이 요아래但是大马这个建立没得，恰恰马因比建没得，恰恰人的要把你有啊的，恰恰当前面人我的安家的，基本的经营过的，当前面写下来没事把人家恰恰的，是哦。
So here one can rephrase the same argument in thinking of things like physical things as well as other things not existing intrinsically as single unitary things because we can apply the analysis of them in terms of parts and wholes. That is, if we examine any kind of thing, a functioning thing that exists, for a thing to exist as a functioning thing, it necessarily has to have parts. We can say that there's no such thing as a functioning thing that is without parts. And since it's the case that we can exclude the possibility of a functioning thing existing without parts, therefore that establishes that if the thing exists in any way whatsoever, a functioning thing necessarily has to have parts to it. The two having parts or not having parts, those two alternatives are direct contradictories. They directly contradict each other. And so if you exclude the possibility that the thing doesn't have parts, you necessarily establish that it does have parts. And that possession of parts entails then that the thing is not a unitary single thing by means of its own intrinsic nature.
Oh yeah, that the new to mena yang and the matter work tomorrow you are sana tomorrow dan was na tomorrow demba mayende the new jig maybe cher tomorrow na the new tomorrow bala the new jig yokure karere sara tomorrow singa de jigla dena shagore oh the new jig maybe tap de jig mena tomorrow maybe cher tomorrow the jigla dena shagore.
Then the opponent here, who's holding on to the view that functioning things exist intrinsically, comes back and says, well, maybe it's not the case that it's a real solid single thing, but how about it's a real ultimately established or ultimately existent plural thing. That it has some kind of real, intrinsically existing plurality to it. They say, so the opponent here is saying, well, perhaps it's a real plurality. And then the reply to that is, it's not a real plurality either. Because there's no real, because some kind of unitary thing established by means of its own intrinsic nature doesn't exist. That's the reason that it can't be a real plurality.
Oh yeah.
La gendi kyapte chikmepar duma.
What is it?
Chikmepar. Duma mapper.
Duma demba mayede dendu jichi yo amares. De karere sana dendu jichi mena duma meko wa karere sana ji mena duma meko mare meko gres. Duma de jile dana sha gres. Duma isinga de jile dana sha gres.
So we can't say, I mean, you can't come back and say, well, it's a real plurality, because plurality is established based on unitariness. Plurality derives from, is dependent upon unitariness. And if there's no intrinsically existent unitariness, then you can't have intrinsically existent plurality composed of intrinsically existing units or single things.
Oh, yeah. There's a word that Tuma chapter Jimena Tuma maybe cheddars. Gasore, Chitan Tuma Mato Bagi, Yoba Mirung, Chitan Tuma Mato Bagi, Yoba Jiwa Mares, and Nitini, Chig number Japana, Juse Yons Chocores, Chitan Tuma Mato, Yoba Mirun, Dinity, Penzu Band, Natural, Segana, Chimayena, Yoba Kansila, Chimayena, Tuma Yangore, Tuma Mayena, Chig Yangure.
So here then, this is based on the the law of the excluded middle, which says that if you have something like a unitary plurality, things are either unitary or they're plural in nature. That is, there's no third alternative there that they could possibly be. If something exists, it's necessarily either unitary or plural. There's no third alternative there. Therefore, if you exclude the possibility, if you exclude the thing being unitary, it's necessarily plural, and the contrary is equally true. If you exclude it being plural, then it's necessarily unitary. These two, if something exists, it is necessarily either unitary or plural in nature. So if you eliminate one, you establish the other, and vice versa.
Oh yeah, Sujenji Chen Tigi, and that the Sujenji Owanam, Anera Casore, Rashin Meba, Chita to my Meba, Rashin to Chirkuna, Chita to Draji, Denziki, Dendru Copare, the Sujenji Owanam, Ane Chitan to Madame, Travi, Denji, Sujenji over Teta. Ane Rashin Meba Tubam, Rashi to a Cobares. The Sene, Ane Shiawata, Kasala Soba, Chitanago, or Tamje, Ane Rashin to Denduji that the Matuba Tala Dana, Ane Rashin to a Cocores.
So here then this. So here then. So here then this refutation, which eliminates any kind of possibility that a functioning thing exists as a intrinsically existent solitary or unitary thing, or an intrinsically existent plurality, composite of things, of intrinsically existing things. Because both alternatives are excluded there, we know that we can establish definitively that there's no such functional, here we're talking about physical things, extended things like tables and chairs and such. Those things cannot possibly be established by means of their own intrinsic nature because they don't exist intrinsically as either units or as composites. Therefore, there's no such, any kind of functional thing cannot be established in that way. And this reasoning that it negates or eliminates the possibility that something exists in a intrinsically unitary fashion or intrinsically plural or composite fashion can also be, the argument here simply uses extended or physical things, but we can apply that to all other kinds of functional existence, such as awareness or persons. Basically all functioning things are covered by this, are subsumed under this refutation of having a intrinsically existing unitary or plural nature.
Oh yeah, that is la. Yeah, that Sujan, Demba Mebari, Sujan de Mere, Sujan de Meyena, Sujan Ransinji Tomba de Ransinji Yodo Sena. Sujan de Don Ransinji Yodo Sena. Sujan Ransinji Yoba Meba, Ane Sujan Ransinji Mebam, Ransinji Troya Mares, Sujan 가서래 수제 라신지 주어면은 안에 수제 땡기 수제지 라신 매밤 안에 라신 주어요 말이 되라 수제 라신지 여밤 매발 수제 라신지 매밤 라신지 주어 매대 권이 땡다 땡바래是吧 때문에 땜바 매비실 가서 돌아 수니자 매매나 수지 티시미 바카라 줄스 도이 가서 수라시지 주바면나 수지 티시니 수지 동바라시지 라시지 바카라 줄스 도이 가서 돌아 수니자 매바나 수지 미티 바카라 줄스 아니 대신도 자바시라블레 뒤제라도 마주바 디마천이 치다 줍东西切件对件让心里面呢，提东吧，俺呢我告诉嘞，去年的俺的让心就主要把看了就是，这我都算。
So here then, this demonstrates by this reasoning that excludes the possibility that things are either unitary or plural in any kind of intrinsically existing fashion. This negates their being established as real. That is, they appear as if they were unitary or plural in some real fashion, but this kind of reasoning rejects or negates that possibility. Then the opponent might come back and say, well, those physical things are empty of being real, but that empty of being real is itself established by means of its own, exists by means of its own intrinsic nature. This sort of position coming back, saying that emptiness exists by means of its own intrinsic nature, is rejected in what follows. So the commentary here says that a physical thing existing by means of its own Zukchen Rangxingi Yuba
Sujet Rangxingi Yuba Mebars, Sujet Rangxingi Yuba Mebars, Sujet Rangxingi Mebang Rangxingi Chua Medes.
So here then the So here the opponent here is saying, well, you've established then that the physical thing is not intrinsically existent, but that emptiness, the absence of being real or being established by means of its own intrinsic nature, that is real, that is established by means of its own intrinsic nature. That's the position that the opponent is advocating here, saying that emptiness is real, really established by means of its own intrinsic nature. That also is rejected. So the opponent presents that alternative, but that existence, that there's no such thing as a physical, that the absence of intrinsic existence of a physical thing exists by means of its own intrinsic nature. It's not the case that, and it's likewise the case that the absence of intrinsic nature of a physical thing is not established by means of its own intrinsic nature. This statement here, or this argument here, is comes out of the scriptures where the Buddha has said that physical things are, since physical things are devoid of intrinsic nature or empty, therefore, how could it be possible that the emptiness, that is their lack of intrinsic nature, is itself established by means of intrinsic nature? That's a paraphrase of the actual scriptural statement itself. But what this is indicating then is that the emptiness of the physical thing, its absence of intrinsic nature, it depends upon the physical thing. That is, the physical thing itself is the base, and the emptiness is that which depends upon it. And since that emptiness is dependent upon its base, the physical thing, for its existence, there's no way that it could be established by means of its intrinsic nature. So it's all of that. The absence of intrinsic existence of the physical thing is also not established by means of intrinsic nature, because if there's no base, then the thing that is based upon it doesn't exist. That is, if the physical thing doesn't exist, the emptiness of it does not exist either.
Oh yeah, that is. Then men, then but member. They, Nancy Jenny, Jaja number Jajana, Namjulani, then me said that Taju Nancy Jenny. Only Su Ransi me, T. Tomba Ransi said that then that teacher, Jaja Su Ransi meba, Annie tell them Betoni Ransi Trubak. Yong Shigmare said that Jaja number Jajana, Namjulani, then me, Shesumba Taro.
So here then, the introduction to the Bodhisattva's way of life expresses this same thing, showing that if the base of emptiness, that is here we're talking about a physical thing being empty, if that physical thing as such doesn't exist, then the emptiness which depends upon it, is based on it, can't exist either. This is explained in the introduction to the Bodhisattva's way of life as well, where it says that the thing that is analyzed, after having analyzed that which is to be analyzed, here in reference, we're talking about looking at a physical thing and trying to investigate, analyze it so as to find its emptiness. Once that has been determined, So the intention of this line then is that if the basis of the emptiness, that's the which possesses the property of being empty, is devoid of intrinsic nature, when one has investigated it and ascertained that it's devoid of intrinsic nature, then how could it be the case that the emptiness which one has ascertained through that analysis or investigation, which is the absence of intrinsic nature of that thing, the base, then how could that emptiness which you've arrived at or discovered be itself intrinsically existent? It's impossible, because it depends upon the thing which one has analyzed or investigated.
Oh yeah, that is all. Shibayang Nyamboyi, Union Meba Chudana, or said that Shiba said, Shiba said, oh Shiba, oh never, Shiba, oh Ran Shibani, Toya Jumbark. Toya Jumbala so, Pumba Toya Jumba Nasi, Toya Jumbala so, Nyamboyi, Ransinji, Nimbi Ransinji Yabani Meba Chutana, say, not Ransinji Yabala. Ani nyambi meba chuchanas daba chani ngo rangshin ji yeba jibam ngo rangshin ji yeba jibam ke jomba chebe nyambo chidar chude minjuwa tas rangshin ji yeba de jomba chebe nyambo yongse gba rangshin ji juwa de tena meba res so rangshin ji juwa zimba de jomba chebe nyambo wa ma do ngo rangshin ji yeba 여바 지금 좀바 체베 냠보 치다르 주디 민주와타 세라 민주데 라시지 여바 스바 마레스 라시지 여바 메바 이자 호 점지 냠보요 마레스.
So then this is discussed further in the next verse, verse 72, which says that 72 says the existent becomes non-existent because it either ceases on its own or is counteracted by something else. But since the existent is impossible, how could there be its cessation or counteragent? There's another way, I retranslated this in just different wording, and it says that, making it into a question, does the existent become non-existent through destruction or through a counteragent? because of the impossibility of this existent, how could there be destruction or a counteragent? That's another way to translate the same verse. And then the commentary here explains that we have to ask whether it is the case that a functioning thing, in the case of a functioning thing disintegrating on its own, or a functioning thing being disintegrate or be destroyed by means of a counteragent. Here, something like a physical thing being destroyed by a counteragent here refers, for example, like to like a table being smashed by a hammer or something like that. And does that destruction of it in that way occur intrinsically? Does that destruction of it occur by means of its intrinsic nature, or does it exist by means of its intrinsic nature, or is it non-existent by means of its intrinsic nature? So those are like the two alternatives that are discussed here. It's impossible, or when we could reply to that and say, how is it possible at all for a functioning thing a functioning thing that exists by means of its own intrinsic nature to disintegrate on its own, or to be destroyed by means of its counteragent? That is impossible, because any kind of thing existing by means of its own intrinsic nature is impossible. Is the final statement here. 그래서 님보
라신지 여바 님비 쪄봐요 말에. 라신지 여바 세자는 미세 바연장 라신지 여바 님비 쪄봐요 말에.
네, 님보 그래서 덴징기 맥바
라신지 여바 집이 덴징기 님보 여와체. 라신지 여바 집이 덴징 그 님보 여와체.
So we can say here that something existing by means of its own intrinsic nature, as such, that there's no way for it to be eliminated, or for it to be destroyed by any kind of counteragent. The simple existence of things by means of intrinsic nature, there's no way to remove that through a counteragent, because existence by means of intrinsic nature simply does not exist, period. However, we can say that the misapprehension of things as existing by means of their own intrinsic nature, that does exist, that kind of misconception that grasps at things as being real or as existing by means of their own intrinsic nature, that does exist, and that in fact can be eliminated by means of its proper antidote or counteragent, which is the wisdom that realizes emptiness.
Oh yeah. 다 라신지 주발라 가서래 임비 좀 매봐. 라신지 여봐 지밤 연바 제비 연바 매와 인장 인제 티체를 양안 대와 대지 양안 대와에 지대된도 주민주로 세 군전 대나 세가 라신지 여봐 임비 지밤 연바 매비 군전 티체나 대나 양안에 대와 토바 이리스다 년바 지밤 코 빵바기 니지 빵바기 양안에 대와 토비 토바이 토비 다좀바이 나르바 토바이 지대한 코와 지대한 코와 나를 아니 전도 나를 라신지 여봐 나를 라신지 여비 코와지 아니 랑ቋ발라 때네 코와 라신지 여봐데 아니 사도 드바 민주와 나를 여봐데 사도 드바 민주와데 가르레서나 라신지 여봐 라신지 여 만용 위치를 nga rangshiji ye ba de de na nga rangshiji ye ba ji go go re rangshiji ye ma yang we che se de la 지된 돈도 드메죠 대진양한 대화이
So here then, because it's the case that there simply is no such thing as existing by means of intrinsic nature, that is impossible. And then the next two lines in the next verse say, therefore, in reality or in fact, the world does not diminish by nirvana, is not diminished by nirvana. So what this means then is that thus by attaining nirvana, here this is attainment of nirvana then means the elimination of all of the obscurations that of mental afflictions, that is the extinction of all of those. That doesn't in reality diminish in any way the world or samsara. There's no diminishment of the world or samsara through the attainment of nirvana. What this means specifically is that the world isn't established by means of its own intrinsic nature. Therefore, it's not in some intrinsic fashion or real fashion that it is eliminated in some real manner. So what this is saying then is that the attainment of nirvana does not in some way remove an intrinsically existent world or diminish the intrinsically existent world, and that which existed previously, and eliminate it such that it is like newly removed in some way, becoming it doesn't like make the intrinsically existent world non-existent, because this intrinsic existence, existing by means of its own intrinsic nature of the world, has never been experienced.
Oh yeah, that didn't teach you. 스타치된 타된도 무슨 비준전이 코어단 양알랜데와 강양 라시지 마주베스 라시지 마주바레스 따와가 뭐 조주 짱이 땅아 조주 짱이데 누나 누마든지 따와 주실래 되고 와래 되게 나네 타단대바다 미덴바다 니가다 니가 많이 받아와 세지요 다들 뭐지 타단 대남 세나 아니 좀 된데라 지된 타단 대남시 쉬나 잡아 미sun송 스타래 좀 된데지 랜점나 아니 타단 미된 타단 대세나 디네 제와 치마 먼저스세나 아니 가서래 야 체달을 왜 같이 당 라신지 대 미된 소나야 아니 다다를 통하겠니 얘가 니 여와 인상 아니 좀 된데지 랜 마송바 쉬나 자와 미sun송 지된 타담 대세나 쉬나 자와 미sun송 타단 대당 미된바니 가로지면나 따다를 통하다 체달을 위냐와 여와 인장 아니 좀 된데지 래 마송바 인장 루마된지 따와 시거든.
So this then leads into the reason in which for the Lord Buddha not having said that the world possesses an end. Here, this is in reference to there are people who possess the view that either the world or nirvana possesses either the world or nirvana is established by means of its own intrinsic nature. They possess wrong views, some kind of evil views. Now, these evil views have proliferated into there's 64 sorts of evil views that people engage, or that people engage in through having the basic notion that the world or nirvana is established by means of its own intrinsic nature. However, one can summarize these 64 evil views into 14 sort of extreme positions that the Lord Buddha on occasion declined to respond to. That is, on occasion he was questioned by people who had wrong view as to, for example, does the world have an end to it, or is it endless? Is it without an end? Now, on that occasion, those people who asked the question, because of their pre-existing wrong views or misconceptions, if the Lord Buddha would have replied to them and said, the world has an end, it stops, then they would have fallen into a nihilistic view, the view of annihilationism, thinking that there is a state in which the world is completely non-existent altogether. Or, on the other hand, if he had said that the world has no end, there's no end to the world, then they would have fallen into the eternalistic view, the view of eternalism, saying that the world exists eternally or in a real sort of fashion. So on that occasion, the Lord Buddha did not reply to those questions.
Oh yeah, 타던 대남에서 장마수마 래마주마 래마수마 슈와지 굉장히 가르래서나 강지 대다 삼미지 내면들라 미송화 굉장히 강게 치나 채시 매배 채지 롱대만 메롱을 치러 왔어요. 채시 매배 채시 된루 매바 인장 아니 덤바 줘봐 그 시대 매바 인장 강 롱대면 되면 롱대만 메롱신 다 매바다 풍보장신지 동배 아니 동바 때문에 내도 메롱와 세네 아니 롱마 때문에 인세들라 강시 대다
So then this is explained then when asked if the world has an end or not, the victor here, it says, did not reply, remained silent. The victor epithet of the Buddha, Lord Buddha here. And so here then there are other members of other traditions which ask the Lord Buddha whether the self or the world possessed an end or not. And when they asked that, he remained silent without responding to their question. And the verse 74 gives the verse here, the wise understand that the omniscient one is indeed omniscient because he did not teach the profound dharma to beings who are not suitable vessels. So actually the syntax of the English is the opposite of the Tibetan here. So starting with the last two lines, because he did not teach the profound dharma to beings who are not suitable vessels, those first two lines are explained in the commentary. Because there was no here, it's inappropriate to state something about something which does not exist. So what that refers to here is that here the person who's asking the question is laboring under the assumption that things exist as they appear, that they're real. And any kind of response that one gives to such a question would cause them to think either the world or the person has a real end or has a real non-end, is really without an end. So either way one responds would entail that misconception to arise. So when there's nothing which is established as real whatsoever, then one cannot give a response which would provide some kind of specification about things, because there's no instantiation, there's no instance of such a real thing that one could say to that person that would answer the question they're asking.
Oh yeah. Rangshi ji chuba tongba tembe ne du mi rungwa se ne 아니 텐다와 데라 렌롱도 맞아바래 스와 대다 삼미체 내민지 좋아라 미송아 되니 너도 메르 되잖아 미송아 되니 되니지 치나 아니 되니 치나 캐남지 군전 탐제 켐버시 세야되게 미송바 되니지 군전 되니지 치나 캐완 남지 송 캐와 남지 송자다 송자 많이 뭐 점된데지 송아 차와다 송아 차와 많이 봐 타다 무슨도 시비 군제 투바 탐제 팀비 이시기 매진반에 많이데 현도나我为铁管呢也把送给切了没这么麻的是的因的我为铁管呢你给我按照开说了送给切了
So here then the situation there is that someone the people who are asking these questions were not suitable vessels for the Lord Buddha to explain emptiness in the sense that the self and the aggregates, there is no such thing as a real self, and that the aggregates are empty of being established by means of their own intrinsic nature. So the Lord Buddha, having seen that those persons on those occasions were not suitable vessels for that teaching, he did not express it on that occasion. He did not teach it. And then the rest of the verse says that, 74, the wise understand that the omniscient one is indeed omniscient because he did not teach the profound Dharma to beings who were not suitable vessels, like in those kinds of situations. So that non-teaching of the suitable Dharma on those occasions is evidence that the Buddha is omniscient. So here it says that thus this profound Dharma, meaning the teaching of emptiness, by the very reason that the Lord Buddha did not teach that to those beings who were not suitable vessels for it, then the intelligent, educated people understand that by this very reason that the Lord Buddha, the sage here, is the omniscient one who directly sees everything which is to be taught and not taught, meaning the specific occasions as well as the subjects which are to be taught in each particular situation. And however, it's not the case that this serves as evidence that the omniscient one doesn't know the totality of things, is not omniscient, because, and the reason for that is clearly that on other occasions he extensively explained the reality of things.
Oh yeah, that's 이제 원도 당연히 마체가 다디 전도되라 수바 전도와라 삼미 자와 수바당 텔라 잡이냐와 자위 삼미 또 받담바 소유베 나네 나 담보 삼모 자와 수바 텔라 대당에 발레비체 삼모 용수 지민신 세데라 대당에 발레비체 다 타르바이바 내가 레비체 타바 또바 까와 사모타 사모스 타바 또바 까와 아니 타 강도양 용수 진짜를 매신 세다 타 다제게 타 다제게 타 강도양 용수 진짜 매신 대당 내가 레비체 사모 용수 진 매신 세 이러와 但让自己主办难没把康熙，但让自己主办难没把康熙，是的，让自己主办难没把是难没把你做上节是，但让自己主办难没把康熙多年是的，当把你多年是吧？但让自己主办难没把康熙的当把你多年狂把钱把来，特别送给这部。特别什么呢？康 강식 도배 티바숨가기 아니 자주 토박에 사모니 저의 상계 탐제지 습관 남지 저 가서 띵거지 제외 돌아 숨발에 시와 치고래 세가다 사모 동반지 돼 띵거지 제외 돌아 때네 시와를 차고래 샤반제 바이바래 일단 내매 반에 조상제 탐제 습관 남지 송
So the next verse, the following subject is a summation of what has been stated above. And here first is a statement showing that the victorious Buddha has taught the profound. Profound is a name for emptiness here. And so this is explained in verse 75, which says that thus the all-seeing perfect Buddhas have said that the Dharma of the highest good is profound, devoid of grasping or misapprehension, and also without any foundation. This another way to translate that is that thus this Dharma of the highest good, refers here to liberation, is the profound or is profound. And it is without any kind of misapprehension. It is without any kind of foundation. This teaching that is without foundation, foundationless, literally. The perfect Buddhas who are omniscient have taught this. And then the commentary here explains that in the same thing, that thus this Dharma of the highest good, that is liberation, is difficult to understand or difficult to realize. It is profound. It is without any kind of misapprehension or misapprehension of any kind of extreme whatsoever, extreme of annihilationism, or the extreme of eternalism. It's free from both of those extremes. It's unapprehendable in those two extreme fashions. It's without any kind of basis or foundation. That is, it doesn't have any kind of foundation which is established by intrinsic nature. And it is that which, if one understands it, that is, if you understand this emptiness, and you condition yourself to it, habituate yourself to it, then one obtains the result, which is the result of all three vehicles, the liberation, which is profound, and the omniscient Buddhas, perfect Buddhas, have explained this in the sutras, such as the Samadhi Raja or the King of Meditative Concentration Sutra, and so forth in those sutras, and one should understand it as the omniscient Buddhas have taught it in those sutras.
Oh yeah, that Rangshiji Tongbi Tongba Nila Trabi Nemi Tela. Nemi Chede Trabai, Kiulani Mongashin, Yeda Mele, Madeba Migetini Puma Churu, Setigi. Nemi Chede Trabai, Silica, Tenzin, Tenzin, Tabatuba Tenzin. Tenzin, Chitara Shambi, Ne, Ani, Rashin, Ne Mebaran, Ne maybe Chede, Rashin, Mana, Trabi, Ani do Toma Mebane, do Teta Toma Mebane, Rashin Truba, Tato Omba Shevi, two, Ani Rashin Trubi, Nela, Rashin Truba, Omba Gashi, Ani Rashin Yabatan. Rashinji Truba Yeba, Meba Zimbale, Madevi, Aniku Migawa Tetani, Ani Chiji Lot Sune, Rashinji Madrubala, Rashinji Yeba, Chiji Lot Suma La Dene, Ani Puma Chukre, Puma Chude, Sigala, Nemichi Trabai, Juna, Yeda Mele Madeba, Miganam the Puma Chur.
So the next verse shows how this profound subject of emptiness is can be a source of terror or fright for those who misapprehend it, and then the bad consequences of misapprehending it and being terrified of it in that way. This is explained in verse 76, introduced in verse 76, which says that persons who delight in foundation, something having a foundation, not having transcended notions of existence and non-existence, are terrified by this foundationless dharma. And being unskilled, finish the verse, they are devastated or ruined, one could say, for that, instead of devastated. So this is explained in the commentary here that this dharma that has been taught is without any kind of foundation, as it's misapprehended or grasped at by the misapprehension of the signs of things. It says here, misapprehension of signs. This is another way of saying misapprehending things as being real, existing by means of their own intrinsic nature. So the Dharma is foundationless in the sense that there's no intrinsically existing foundation for it or for things. And this Dharma of absence of foundation terrifies some persons who have, by the force of their affection for, or the force of their being absorbed in the idea of a self, which is established by means of its own intrinsic nature. And persons who have been habituated to that sort of affection for the notion of an intrinsically existing self, beginninglessly, we have this kind of affection or attachment to that notion of the intrinsically existent self. Such persons take delight in things being established by means of their things having a foundation or basis, which is established by means of its own intrinsic nature. And then such persons, because they're unwise and they're unable to transcend the apprehension of things as existing by means of their own intrinsic nature, and then, or they come to, on the contrary, come to think that things may exist by means of their own intrinsic nature and then become completely non-existent, thus falling into both of the two extremes of real existence and real non-existence. They hold this, by holding this teaching of the profound emptiness in an incorrect fashion, they misapprehend it, and they're ruined.
Oh yeah, that and the digi, Migan namne Puma Juru said the Ranshi Truba Zimba in Zang, Tata Hunu Gone, and the Rani Puma Chabat. That didn't teach Jella. Jimmy Neji Tedane, Pula Shanla Pumachi, Pula Shan Pumachi, said the Chatter Hunu Gone. And or Gundagutawa can by Zang, Chatter Hunu Gone, and Purani Pumacha Batera. Jibariba Mayimba said, Ranshi Mebala Jibariba Mayimba. Ranshi Meba in Zan Tell and Jiba Riba Mayimbi, Ne Ranshi Mebala Jiba Tedani. Kaji Ranshi Tomba Neluji tend to Dambana, that Ranshi Mena Dana Megure, Dambana, Goa Depsing. I know Goa Deshi, Ranshi Meba Dambatella, Goa Deshing, Ranshi Meba the Pomachella. Ranshi Meba Pone, Annie, or Castle. Ranshi Mena Meba Tawa Yembe, Annie Telatene, Nandro Draw. Oh, Mepatawaki, Mepapan, Mandro, Yepapan, Dendro, so Anachimene, and in Andro Town. Yang Kaji tell a major 10 chin or Gaba tea turned to Quanes. 10 chin or Gaba tea Quane, Yang Landella Gua Depsing. Chill Kanyang, Yema Kandoyan Suma, my nose, Yabayam Mai, Mebayam Mai. Or that Tenita, yumi mimi ke tawa suni suma cha mayi no she teka ma shi she la yang teta dropa chebe o na cheba ta rang yang pung la ane she yang pung wa cheba re yin zang pung le she yang pung wa che.
So here then, the first part of the next verse, 77, says that those who are terrified of this foundation, which is devoid of fear, which is free of fear, are ruined, and then they ruin others as well. So here, there's two alternatives here. On the one hand, one who is habituated to the idea that things are real, and if something exists, it necessarily must exist by means of its own intrinsic nature. That entails that one falls into the extreme of eternalism or realism, and by virtue of that, one ruins oneself in the sense that one will continue to take rebirth within samsara in the best case. Or in any case, one will continue to take rebirth in samsara. Now, there's another case in which some who are terrified of this foundationless state, the emptiness as being without any kind of foundation. Here, then, it's inappropriate to be frightened of this teaching, but by the virtue of being habituated to realism, then many people, when they hear it, or some people, when they hear it, they fall into a nihilistic view, thinking that it entails the total non-existence of things, or a kind of skepticism which is unable to predicate or establish anything about anything. And then they're ruined as well by falling into a kind of extreme of nihilism or annihilationism. And then, so some of these persons then, when they're taught this teaching on the meaning of reality, of the way things are, that is, that things are empty of intrinsic nature, they, if they're habituated to realism, they might deprecate this teaching on emptiness and reject it. They cast it away. And then by casting away emptiness from a realist perspective, denying it and deprecating it, they can fall into lower states of existence in that way. And then there are other people who they admire emptiness. They hear emptiness and they think, oh, that's good. But they think that the teaching on emptiness, they misunderstand it, or they consider it as teaching emptiness is the refutation of functional things. That is, it's a refutation of the of belief in a rejection of the belief in things having the ability to perform functions. They misconstrue it as emptiness as entailing that. And then out of that, they come to say that, well, if that's the case, if things don't function, there's no functionality of things, then karma and its effects, which are functional things, don't really exist. And so they deprecate and deny the existence of karma and its effects. And some of these people would then say, well, and also this teaching on emptiness, it means that there's no phenomena whatsoever about which one can say it exists or it doesn't exist. One can't apprehend or come to understand phenomena as existing or not existing. That kind of a view, which is called the view of things neither exist nor do not exist, a kind of skepticism. That kind of view will also, some people will advocate that view, and they'll proclaim this kind of misapprehension of emptiness to others, and by proclaiming it to others, as it's explained subsequently in the text here, they ruin themselves and then they ruin others as well.
Oh, yeah. 단지 로베 시와저 오마젠지 대화 송바 따르스 다 차서바당 리다 서바 소니 랑샹라 페바 충위소 아니 소자 나젠 아니 가서를 장여바 시 서바담도 세그레 다데 서바기 아니 미게 윌라메지 대우잠만도 세그레 다 돈이 봉하니 돈이 돈바니 봉하 쳐바니 세변 탐제지 마르비 드메 세위 추지 아니 추구 줄라 내바 쳐와 임베 아니 달로스 대바 남지 내한테 돈이 봉 내한테 사버 차오 송가르 로 디나나 이송과 가서 가사도 따와니 라이 돈바니라 라바세바니 대다 민노 나만이 세자라 몸바자면지 안에 세자 탐자라 고와 미데라 现在的保养普米些，那边是来也往民主。当你帮我的太阳大把的，在你打那些你别拿了，农场的生活的就不生活的啊。
Die Nachtschinsene.
啊。
심chen 속차 Nachtshin.
啊。茶说巴当，日大说巴说呢，让现了偏把穷于少见那见身上，那天节的卡说的，东岸见，什么那把，什么那把长月吧，是。So
here then, Master Shantarakshita has explained this or given a sort of a discussion of this in his commentary on the ornament for the middle way. And there he says that those who are bird catchers, who hunt birds, those who kill deer and so forth, hunters, people who do that kind of thing, what they have done is simply killing some quantity of beings, of animals, which are and these animals are of relatively small benefit to them. They don't have great lives themselves, and they don't benefit themselves all that much. These animals that are killed by the hunters and bird catchers and such. So all they've done then is created that kind of negative karma of killing, and when after they've been reborn in some evil state of existence as a result of the hunting the animals, then that negative karma will be extinguished or exhausted. The force of that negative karma will be exhausted by that. But this action of abandoning or casting away emptiness, as we've described above, that case, because it harms, it functions to harm the cause of the Dharmakaya for all sentient beings, and the Dharmakaya. Here is the lamp which dispels the darkness of the ignorance of all sentient beings. Therefore, harming the teaching of emptiness, as we've described it above, is much more profound in terms of its heaviness than the simple action of killing birds and deer and so forth, hunting them. Therefore, those who wish for happiness for themselves, those who wish themselves well, should be extremely cautious about this subject, this topic here. This is explained in a quotation as well from the Essence of Good Explanations. Je Rinpoche has quoted a sutra passage in which the Buddha has said there that la gendi lung di tromasong lung tromasong like bo lung
가사도 따와네 라이 돈이 로바스반이 타자마이노 가사도 따와서나 가사 라완도 추와 점바데 라레 와 돈이 로바스반이 또 로바슈바데 타마이노 아니 가세 누구면도 돈이 로바스 아마니 세자라 몸바자미 인지 몸바자미 랑신 몸바자미 인지 세자 탐자로 고와 밑에 그 말에 고바 못해 봐 인자 티남이 되고라 야와에 지금 말했어. 와 아니 현 최다 봐야 풍아 지금 말했어. 랑심 치마데 랑심에 봤다 봐 되게 다 대란 또 봐. 와
So here then the quotation goes that the view of a self is relatively light. It's relatively insignificant. That view, misconception of the self, misapprehending the self as being real, all that does is cause some problem for oneself. It makes one create karma and such that one continues to exist within samsara. So that's a relatively insignificant problem. However, misapprehension of emptiness, holding emptiness in the wrong fashion, is not like that at all. The misapprehension of the self, it simply creates problems for oneself in the sense of continued existence within samsara and such. Whereas, and it's merely misapprehension or misconception about one phenomenon, the person here as having a self. Whereas the misapprehension of emptiness and the deprecation of the teaching of emptiness, saying that it's wrong or that it's actually not the case, that kind of negative karma is much heavier because it's basically denying the existence of all phenomena in their totality. And from that kind of heavy wrong view, then it ruins oneself in a much more profound fashion, and entails falling into this extreme kind of wrong view. And then likewise out of that, it can induce one to mislead other people into this extreme nihilistic view as well, such that it ruins other sentient beings as well. So therefore, this misapprehending or holding emptiness in the wrong fashion has much heavier consequences.